Be me, 22, about to graduate at the top of my class. The world is supposed to be my oyster or whatever that boomer saying is. I have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, and a vague but shiny vision for my life by 40. It involves a corner office, a killer apartment with a skyline view, and a wardrobe that costs more than my parents' first car. What it doesn't involve is a husband, a mortgage in the suburbs, or a minivan full of screaming kids. I saw what that life did to my mother. She had dreams once, an art degree she never used. Now her biggest creative outlet is arranging decorative pillows. Never going to be me. My friends and I talk about it all the time in the campus coffee shop. We call it the trap. The pressure to settle down, to pair up, to sacrifice your ambition for someone else's comfort. It's a system designed to keep women small. We'd see it everywhere. The brilliant female students who'd start talking about engagement rings in their final year, their focus suddenly shifting from dissertations to wedding venues. It was like watching a switch being flipped. We promised each other we'd be different. We were the new generation, the ones who wouldn't fall for it. Our careers would be our partners. Success would be our family. In this environment, you start to see men in a certain way. Not as people, but as potential obstacles. Every compliment feels like an assessment. Every offer of help feels like an insinuation that you can't do it on your own. You build up a wall, a polite but firm barrier. It's a survival mechanism. And then there was Gordon. I knew him from high school. He wasn't in my immediate circle, but he was always around. One of those quiet, steady guys, solidly built, not flashy. He was studying engineering, something practical and boring. He was the definition of nice, a word that made my skin crawl. Nice was the anesthetic they gave you before they put you in the trap. He'd try to talk to me sometimes. I'd be rushing out of the library, arms full of books, and he'd hold the door, offering to help carry them. I'd just give him a tight smile and say, "I've got it, thanks," making sure to shoulder the weight myself to prove a point. He probably thought he was being a gentleman. I saw it as a subtle power play, an assumption of my weakness. Another time, I was studying late and missed the last campus shuttle back to my dorm. It was a long walk, and it had started to rain. He was leaving the engineering lab and saw me standing under an awning. He had a car, a beat-up but reliable-looking sedan. He pulled up and offered me a ride. "It's no trouble, you'll get soaked." I remember looking at his car, then back at him. My brain just flashed through all the warnings, all the stories. I told him I preferred the walk. It wasn't even a conscious decision, more like a reflex. He just nodded, looking a little confused, and drove off. I walked home in the cold rain, feeling strangely victorious. I had protected my independence. My friends would have been proud. We shared stories like that, patting each other on the back for not caving to the patriarchy's little tests. The final semester was a blur of exams and job interviews. I landed a prestigious internship at a huge consulting firm in the city. The first step of my 5-year plan was right on schedule. The future felt electric, a straight shining line upwards. The graduation party was at some off-campus house. The whole senior class was there, celebrating the end of an era. I was in my element, surrounded by my friends, talking about our starting salaries and the cities we were moving to. Someone handed me a plastic cup of cheap sparkling wine for a toast. I remember getting up on a chair, feeling bold. I raised my cup and said something about how we were the women who were going to run the world. I made a joke about my only long-term commitment being to my student loans and my career. Said something about how a man should be a bonus, not a requirement. Everyone in my circle cheered. I felt like a queen. Later that night, I was standing by myself for a minute, and Gordon approached me. He looked different, not in a bad way. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt. He seemed more confident than I remembered. He wasn't awkward or shy. He just looked at me directly. He said he'd heard my toast, and while he didn't agree with all of it, he'd always admired my drive. Then he said it. "Sophia, we're both moving on from this chapter. Before we do, I just have to ask. Would you be willing to go out with me just once? A real date, dinner, conversation, no expectations." The whole world seemed to slow down. All my friends were watching. This was a public test of my principles. Saying yes would have been a betrayal of everything I'd just proclaimed. I looked him up and down. Gordon, the nice guy, the safe choice, the embodiment of the suburban trap I was so desperate to escape. I gave him the same smile I'd perfected over 4 years, polite but with a steel edge. Gordon, that's sweet of you to offer, I said, my voice just loud enough for others to hear. But I'm not looking for a relationship. I'm looking to build an empire. My 5-year plan is very demanding, and it really doesn't have room for distractions. The word distractions hung in the air. I saw the look on his face. It wasn't anger, it was a kind of quiet, resigned disappointment, like he had expected it, but hoped for something different. He just gave a small nod. Okay, I understand. Good luck with your empire, Sophia. He turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd. My friends immediately swarmed me. Oh my God, you were amazing. The look on his face. You totally shut him down. I felt a surge of validation. I had passed the test. I was strong. I was independent. I was on my way. I didn't think about Gordon again for a very long time. The city was everything I dreamed of. My internship turned into a full-time analyst position. The hours were brutal. 80-hour weeks were the norm. I lived on coffee and ambition. My apartment was a tiny shoebox, but it was mine. I decorated it with minimalist furniture and framed prints of abstract art. No floral patterns, no soft edges. Everything was clean, functional, and professional, just like me. The men in this world were different. They weren't nice like Gordon. They were sharks, investment bankers, corporate lawyers, tech entrepreneurs. They talked about stock options and acquisitions on first dates. Relationships were a form of networking. I learned the game quickly. I dated a guy from a rival firm for a few months. He was handsome, intelligent, and wore impeccably tailored suits. We looked good together at corporate events. We were a power couple in the making. But there was no warmth. Our conversations were transactions. We'd trade information about the market, about office politics. We never talked about our families, our fears, our dreams. It was all surface level. One evening, I was completely burned out from a project. I just wanted to order a pizza and watch a stupid movie. I suggested it to him. He looked at me like I had suggested we start a petting zoo in his apartment. He said he had a networking gala to attend. It was important for his brand. He said I should come. It would be good for my visibility too. I realized then that we weren't a couple. We were a joint venture, and I was tired of being a line item on his balance sheet. We broke up shortly after. It was amicable, like dissolving a business partnership. No tears, just a handshake, and a let's keep in touch. This became a pattern. I'd meet someone impressive. We'd date for a while. The relationship would be built on shared ambition and mutual benefit. And it would end when the cost-benefit analysis no longer made sense for one of us. It was clean, logical, and deeply, profoundly empty. But I told myself this was the price of admission to the world I wanted to be in. This was what it meant to be a strong, independent woman. No messy emotions, no codependency. I got promoted, then promoted again. My shoebox apartment became a 1-bedroom with a small balcony. My 5-year plan was right on track. I was 27 and already a senior analyst. My parents would call and ask if I was seeing anyone. My mom would gently suggest that it's not good to be alone. I'd get defensive. Mom, I'm not alone. I have my work. I have my friends. But my friends were just as busy as I was. We'd schedule brunch weeks in advance, then one of us would cancel because of a work emergency. Our friendship was maintained through occasional likes on social media posts. One night, I couldn't sleep. I was scrolling through my phone, just aimlessly browsing. I don't know why, but I typed Gordon's name into the search bar. His profile popped up. It was public. The first photo I saw was of him and a woman. She was pretty, with a kind smile. They were standing on a hiking trail, squinting in the sun. They looked happy. Genuinely happy. I scrolled further. There were pictures of them with a group of friends having a barbecue, pictures of them fixing up an old house, a picture of a golden retriever puppy chewing on a shoe. It was all so normal. A part of my brain, the part I'd been trained to suppress, felt a strange pang. But the ambitious, logical part took over. This is fine for him, I thought. He's an engineer. This is the life he was built for. Simple, predictable, safe. I was different. I was destined for more. This quiet domestic life was a cage, and I was meant to fly. I closed the app and forced myself to focus on the presentation I had to give the next morning. I was now 32. I had made junior partner at my firm, a major achievement. My apartment now had that skyline view I'd always dreamed of. I was respected, feared even, by some of the younger analysts. I was known for being ruthless and efficient. I took pride in that reputation. I was dating a surgeon. He was brilliant, at the top of his field. He was also arrogant, emotionally distant, and worked even more hours than I did. Our schedules barely aligned. We'd see each other maybe once a week, usually for a late dinner, where we'd both be checking our phones for work emails. It felt less like a relationship, and more like a recurring appointment. One weekend, he was actually free. He invited me to a party at a senior partner's house in the Hamptons. It was one of those sprawling estates with a perfect lawn and ocean views. The people there were all incredibly wealthy and powerful. I felt like I should have been thrilled to be there, but I just felt out of place. All the conversations were about money, the stock market, real estate, their kids' private school tuition. I was talking to a group of women. They were all wives of doctors or bankers. They asked me what I did. I told them I was a junior partner at a consulting firm. Their faces went blank. One of them forced a smile and said, "Oh, that's nice. It must be so challenging." Then they immediately changed the subject to their upcoming trip to Aspen. I was an alien species to them. Later, I saw my surgeon boyfriend talking to another doctor and his wife. The wife was holding a baby. He was actually smiling, a real, genuine smile, as he played with the baby's hand. I had never seen him smile like that. On the car ride back to the city, I asked him if he ever wanted kids. He laughed, not a nice laugh. It was sharp and dismissive. He said, "Of course not. A family is a chain around your neck. It's a career killer. I thought you, of all people, would understand that." I did understand it. It was the same thing I had been telling myself for 10 years. So, why did hearing him say it out loud feel like a punch to the gut? We broke up a few weeks later, or rather, we just stopped making appointments to see each other. There was no formal announcement. We just faded out of each other's lives. It was a lonely year. A few of my university friends started having their first kids. Their social media feeds changed. Pictures of cocktails and career achievements were replaced by pictures of ultrasounds and chubby babies in onesies. I felt a growing distance from them. Our lives were on completely different tracks. They would invite me to baby showers. I'd go, bringing an expensive gift from a registry. I'd sit there, listening to them talk about sleep schedules and breastfeeding, and I would have absolutely nothing to contribute. I was an outsider looking in at a world I didn't understand and had actively chosen to reject. During one of these events, an old friend pulled me aside. She asked me, genuinely concerned, if I was happy. I immediately went on the defensive. Of course I'm happy. I just made partner. I love my job. I have a great life. She looked at me with sad eyes. "I know about your job, Sophia, but I'm asking about you. Are you happy?" I didn't know how to answer that. I went home to my beautiful empty apartment and cried for the first time in years. I told myself it was just stress from work. That night, out of some self-destructive curiosity, I looked up Gordon again. There was a new album of photos, titled Wedding Day. He had married that girl from the hiking picture. The photos were beautiful, not because they were fancy, but because they were real. The wedding wasn't in some grand ballroom. It looked like it was in a rustic barn. Everyone was laughing. His wife was looking at him with so much love, it was almost tangible. He was looking at her the same way. There was a photo of them dancing, and he was just holding her, his eyes closed, with a look of pure, unadulterated contentment on his face. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. It was jealousy. A raw, ugly, powerful jealousy. I hated myself for feeling it. This was not part of my plan. Emotions like this were weaknesses. I slammed my laptop shut. "He's weak," I told the empty room. "He chose the easy path. Love, family. It's a crutch for people who can't make it on their own." But the words sounded hollow, even to me. I poured myself a glass of expensive wine, put on some loud music to drown out my thoughts, and got back to work. Work was my fortress. As long as I was working, I didn't have to feel anything else. The next few years, I worked even harder. I became obsessed. My life was a repeating loop of my office, my apartment, and airports. I traveled constantly for business: London, Tokyo, Singapore. I collected passport stamps like trophies. I had brief flings with men I met on these trips: a banker in Hong Kong, an architect in Berlin. They were temporary with clear expiration dates. It was safe. No chance of messy emotional attachments. I was 38. Most of my original university friends had 2 or 3 kids by now. Our group chat was dead. My parents had stopped asking about my love life. They just looked at me with a sort of worried pity when I'd visit for the holidays, which was rare. During one Christmas dinner, my younger brother announced that his girlfriend was pregnant. My whole family erupted in celebration. My mother cried happy tears. My dad hugged him, patting him on the back. I just sat there, smiling a fake smile, feeling like I was behind a glass wall, watching a happy family I wasn't really a part of. Later, my mom found me looking out the window. She put a hand on my shoulder. "It's not too late for you, you know," she said softly. I snapped. I turned on her, my voice sharp. "Too late for what, Mom? Too late to give up my entire life to raise a family in the suburbs? I've built something for myself. I'm successful. Isn't that enough?" Her face crumpled. "I just want you to be happy, Sophia." "I am happy," I insisted, my voice cracking. The fight cast a pall over the rest of the visit. I left early the next morning. On the flight back to the city, I stared out at the clouds and wondered when I had become so angry. I dove back into my work like a drowning person clinging to a raft. I was aiming for the next big promotion, senior partner, the top of the food chain. It was a brutal competition. I was up against 2 other partners, both men. I knew they saw me as a threat. They would have boys' club meetings after hours, making deals on the golf course. I saw their tactics as clear evidence of the toxic masculinity that still ran the corporate world. It made me fight harder. I outworked them. I was more prepared. I was smarter. I landed the firm's biggest client in a decade. It was a massive career-defining win. The promotion was practically guaranteed. I was 40 years old. I had finally reached the peak of the mountain I had been climbing for 2 decades. The firm threw a party to celebrate the new client. My boss, the CEO, made a speech and called me up to the front. He praised my dedication, my unflinching commitment, my willingness to sacrifice anything for the good of the firm. As everyone applauded, I stood there, holding a glass of champagne, smiling for the cameras. I should have felt ecstatic. Instead, I felt nothing, just a hollow, echoing silence in my chest. I scanned the crowd of my colleagues' faces. They were smiling, but their eyes were calculating. They were already thinking about how to leverage my success for their own gain. There was no real warmth. No one there truly cared about me. They cared about what I could do for them. I had become just like all the men I used to date. I was a transaction. I went home that night to my perfectly clean, perfectly silent penthouse apartment. The skyline view was breathtaking, a sea of glittering lights. I had made it. This was the vision. So why did it feel like I was standing at the edge of a cliff? The old habit kicked in, the self-destructive urge to look. I opened my laptop. I went to Gordon's profile. He had kids now, a boy and a girl. There was a picture of him in the backyard of that house he'd been fixing up years ago. He was on his hands and knees, pretending to be a horse, and his 2 little kids were on his back, laughing hysterically. His wife was in the background, watching them with a smile of pure joy on her face. The golden retriever was there, older now, sleeping in a patch of sun. It was a messy, chaotic, beautiful scene. It was a life, a real, tangible life, full of noise and love and connection. And I was here, in my sterile, silent box in the sky, with nothing but my ambition to keep me warm. The wall I had built around myself, brick by brick, for 20 years, finally began to crack. That image of Gordon and his family was burned into my mind. I spent the next few days in a fog. The senior partner promotion was officially announced. My picture was in the firm's internal newsletter. I received hundreds of congratulatory emails. Each one felt like a grain of sand being added to a pile on my chest. My bonus was astronomical. I bought a new car, a sleek, absurdly expensive sports car. I drove it out of the city one weekend, just to feel something. I drove fast, the engine roaring, but the emptiness just sat there in the passenger seat beside me. I told myself this was just a phase, post-achievement blues. It's a common psychological phenomenon. You work so hard for a goal, and when you reach it, you feel let down. I diagnosed myself like I was one of my clients. The solution was simple: find a new, bigger goal. But what was bigger than this? CEO? I didn't want the headaches. Starting my own firm? Too much risk. For the first time in my life, I looked at the path ahead, and it was just more of the same. More meetings, more flights, more soulless corporate battles. The shining line upwards had flattened out into a long, gray plateau. The loneliness started to get worse. It wasn't a passive feeling anymore. It was an active, gnawing presence. My apartment, once my sanctuary of success, started to feel like a prison. The silence was deafening. I started leaving the TV on all the time, just for the background noise. I tried to reconnect with some people from my past. I sent a message to one of my old university friends, the one who'd asked if I was happy. I suggested we get dinner, catch up properly. She agreed, but she could only do a 5:30 p.m. dinner on a Tuesday, and she had to be home by 7:30 for her kid's bedtime. The dinner was awkward. I tried to talk about my work, the huge client I landed. Her eyes glazed over. She talked about her son's soccer league and her daughter's ballet lessons. I had nothing to say. It felt like we were speaking two different languages. At one point, she showed me a picture of her kids on her phone. "They're my whole world," she said, with a simple, uncomplicated sincerity that I found both beautiful and infuriating. As she was leaving, she gave me a quick, pitying hug. "Take care of yourself, Sophia." It was clear we wouldn't be doing this again. I decided I needed to get back into dating, properly this time. Not the transient flings I had on business trips, but a real effort. I was 41 now. The dating landscape had changed. It was all apps. I created a profile. It was a humiliating experience, trying to distill my entire life and personality into a few carefully selected photos and a witty bio. I was honest, senior partner at a top firm, well-traveled, financially independent. I thought this would be impressive. I thought it would attract the high-caliber men I felt I deserved. I was wrong. The men my age, the successful ones, were all looking for women in their late 20s or early 30s. Their profiles would often explicitly say, "wants kids someday." My biological clock wasn't just ticking, the alarm had gone off and the battery had died years ago. I was filtered out before they even saw me. I got messages from men in their late 20s. They were fascinated by my success. They'd call me a girl boss and say it must be amazing to be so powerful. It became clear very quickly that they weren't interested in me as a person. They were interested in my lifestyle. They wanted a mentor, a benefactor, a sugar mama. One guy I went on a date with actually asked me for career advice for most of the dinner. Then there were the men who were just plain intimidated. We'd be having a decent conversation, and then they'd ask what I do. The moment I told them, I could see a switch flip behind their eyes. Their posture would change. They'd become deferential or defensive. One man literally said, "Wow, you must not have much time for a relationship." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. A reason to disqualify me. Another one made a joke about who would wear the pants in the relationship. It was a classic sign of his insecurity, his feeling threatened by a woman who earned more than him. More toxic masculinity. The dates were a parade of disappointment. The shallow men who only wanted youth. The opportunistic men who only wanted my money. The insecure men who couldn't handle my success. After a few months of this, I deleted the apps. It was more draining and demoralizing than any corporate negotiation I'd ever been in. My analysis was simple. The system was broken. Modern dating was a wasteland for a woman like me. Society punishes successful women. It tells us to be strong and independent, but when we are, it leaves us with no viable partners. Men say they want a strong woman, but their egos can't actually handle one. This conclusion was comforting. It wasn't my fault. It was society's fault. It was men's fault. It was a neat, logical explanation that kept my own choices out of the equation. Work became more stressful. The pressure of being a senior partner was immense. I was managing a huge team, responsible for millions of dollars in revenue. Everyone wanted a piece of me. Everyone had a problem they needed me to solve. I was constantly putting out fires, managing egos, playing politics. It was exhausting. One afternoon, I was in a high-stakes meeting with a client. I stood up to present, and suddenly the room started to spin. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My heart started pounding in my chest, a frantic, irregular rhythm. I couldn't breathe. It felt like an invisible band was tightening around my lungs. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. My vision started to go blurry at the edges. I mumbled an apology, something about needing a moment, and stumbled out of the conference room. I made it to the restroom and collapsed against the cool tile wall, gasping for air. I honestly thought I was having a heart attack. I was 42 years old, and I was going to die alone in an office bathroom on a Tuesday. The episode eventually passed. I was left shaky and terrified. My assistant found me and, seeing the state I was in, insisted on calling a car to take me home. The next day I went to a doctor. I sat there in a paper gown while he ran a series of tests. EKG, blood work, the whole 9 yards. I was expecting a terrible diagnosis. He came back into the room, looked at my chart, and then looked at me over his glasses. He told me my heart was fine. Physically, I was in excellent health for my age. He said what I had experienced was a classic severe panic attack, brought on by extreme stress and chronic exhaustion. He asked me about my work-life balance. I almost laughed. What life? He prescribed me some medication for anxiety and strongly recommended I take some time off. Your body is sending you a clear signal, Sophia, he said. If you don't listen to it, it will find a way to make you listen. Taking time off was unthinkable. My entire identity was wrapped up in my job, but the fear of another attack was real. So I did something I hadn't done in over 15 years. I took a 2-week vacation. I didn't know where to go. All the exotic places I used to visit for work just seemed empty. I ended up booking a quiet rental house on the coast, a few hours from the city. I brought 3 books on business strategy and my laptop. The first few days were torture. I couldn't relax. I checked my work email every 5 minutes. My mind was racing. The silence of the house was even worse than the silence of my apartment. Here, it was accompanied by the mocking sound of waves crashing on the shore. I tried to read my business books, but the words just swam in front of my eyes. They felt meaningless. On the 5th day, I left my laptop in the house and went for a long walk on the beach. The beach was mostly empty, just a few families, their kids chasing seagulls. I watched a father teaching his young son how to fly a kite. The kite would catch the wind, soar for a moment, and then crash into the sand. The little boy would get frustrated, but the father would just patiently untangle the string, show him how to hold it again, and help him launch it back into the air. There was such an easy, unforced tenderness between them. I stood there watching them for a long time, feeling a profound ache in my chest. It was a feeling I couldn't name. It was deeper than sadness, more complex than regret. It was the feeling of seeing a life I would never, ever have. That night, I was sitting on the deck of the rental house, staring at the ocean. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from a social media site. Someone had tagged me in an old photo. It was a group picture from our university graduation. There I was, 22 years old, beaming, holding my diploma like a weapon. My whole group of feminist friends was around me. We all looked so certain, so full of righteous fire. And just at the edge of the frame, partially cut off, you could see Gordon. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at me. And the expression on his face, it wasn't just a crush, it was admiration. It was a genuine, open-hearted hope. It was the look of a man who saw something in me that I hadn't even seen in myself. And I had looked at him and seen nothing but an obstacle, a distraction. I stared at that photo for a solid hour. I saw the fork in the road I hadn't even realized I was at, the path I had chosen, and the one I had dismissed without a second thought. My 2-week vacation ended. I went back to work. I tried to implement the doctor's advice. I started leaving the office at 7 p.m. instead of 10. I didn't check emails on the weekend. My colleagues noticed. "Everything okay, Sophia? You seem off," one of my partners said. The implication was clear. I was losing my edge. I had built my reputation on being the person who was always on, always available. By setting boundaries, I was violating the unwritten terms of my own success. I felt trapped. The work was killing me, but backing away from it felt like admitting defeat. My 43rd and 44th birthdays came and went. I spent them both alone. On my 44th, I treated myself to dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. I sat at a table for one, surrounded by happy couples and celebrating families. I ate my perfectly cooked, ridiculously expensive meal, and it tasted like ash. The waiter brought me a small dessert with a single candle in it, a complimentary gesture from the management. He smiled at me with professional pity. "Happy birthday, ma'am." I went home, and for the first time, I didn't look up Gordon. I didn't need to. The image of his life was already permanently seared into my brain. It was my own personal ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way the male partners at my firm talked about their families. I had always dismissed it as boring small talk. But now I listened. They'd complain about being tired because their kid was sick all night, but there was an undercurrent of pride in their voice. They'd show off pictures of their kids' school projects. They'd talk about coaching Little League. They had this whole other life, this whole other identity outside of the office. When they went home, they were husbands. They were fathers. When I went home, I was just a senior partner who wasn't at the office. I had always seen the world through the lens of gender inequality, how women had to sacrifice family for a career, while men could have both. I saw myself as a victim of that system. But sitting in my quiet apartment, another lonely Friday night stretching out before me, a new terrifying thought began to take shape. What if the system wasn't the only thing to blame? What if I had made a choice, a clear, conscious choice, back at that graduation party? I had chosen the empire over the connection, the corner office over the chance at a shared life. I had looked at a good, kind man who offered me genuine affection, and I had publicly humiliated him to score points with my friends and prove my ideological purity. The memory, which I had suppressed for years, came back with stunning clarity. The look on his face, the quiet dignity with which he walked away. He hadn't argued, he hadn't begged. He had just accepted my decision and moved on with his life. And he had built his own empire, a small, quiet empire of love and family and happiness. While I was sitting in the cold, empty throne room of mine, the anxiety started to come back, a low hum beneath the surface of my daily life. I was losing my grip. The neat, logical narratives I had constructed to explain my life were falling apart. My work performance started to suffer. I made a few small mistakes, missed a deadline, things I would have never done before. The other partners noticed. The sharks were circling. They could smell blood in the water. My position, which had once felt so secure, now felt precarious. I had nothing to fall back on, no husband or family to come home to and say, I had a terrible day. No deep friendships to lean on. My friends were professional contacts. I had systematically cut every wire of my personal support system, believing it was a weakness. Now I was a tightrope walker, 45 years old, with no safety net, and the rope was starting to fray. The end was coming. I didn't know how or when, but I could feel it. A storm was gathering on the horizon of my life, and I was standing all alone in an open field. The final piece that pushed me over the edge was something small, almost insignificant. It was a work thing, a new project, a huge multi-year project that I had been championing. The next big mountain to climb. It required building a new team from scratch. I was in a meeting with the CEO and the other senior partners, discussing the leadership for this new venture. I naturally assumed it would be me. It was my baby. The CEO cleared his throat. He said that while I had done the foundational work, the board felt the project needed a leader who could commit for the long haul, at least the next 10 years. Then he looked at me, with that same professional pity as the waiter. He said they had decided to give the project to a younger partner, a man in his late 30s, a man who had a wife and kids, a man who was seen as stable and invested in the future. I was being sidelined, put out to pasture. The reason wasn't spoken aloud, but everyone in the room understood it. I was 45. I was single. I had no children. In the ruthless calculus of the corporate world, I had no legacy. No reason to be stable. I was seen as a flight risk, a lone wolf who might just cash out and disappear. The very independence I had cultivated my entire life was now being used as a weapon against me. I sat there in that meeting, my face a perfect impassive mask. I nodded. I said I understood the board's decision. I offered my full support to the new project lead. I played the part of the good corporate soldier, but inside, something shattered. The last pillar holding up my entire identity had just been kicked out from under me. My career, my work, the one thing I had sacrificed everything for. It hadn't loved me back. In the end, it was just a business, and I was just an asset with a depreciating value. I walked out of that meeting and went back to my office. My office, the corner office, floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline view I had bled for. It looked like a museum exhibit, the museum of my life's work, and it was already collecting dust. My assistant came in, holding a tablet. "Sophia, you have the quarterly review at 3 p.m. and—" I held up a hand. I couldn't hear her. Her voice was just a buzzing sound. "Cancel it," I said. My voice sounded strange, distant. "Cancel the whole review?" she asked, her eyes wide. This was unheard of. "Cancel everything for the rest of the day," I said, "and tomorrow." I didn't wait for her response. I grabbed my purse and my coat. I walked past her, out of my office, through the bullpen where all the junior analysts were hunched over their desks. I didn't say a word to anyone. I walked to the elevator, rode it down 50 floors in silence, and walked out of the building into the cold afternoon air. I didn't go home. I just started walking. I walked for hours, with no destination. The city streets, usually a source of energy for me, felt alien and hostile. The crowds of people rushing past me, talking on their phones, laughing with friends. They were all part of a world I no longer belonged to. I was a ghost, a well-dressed, professionally successful ghost. I ended up in a small park I didn't recognize. I sat on a bench. The sun was starting to set. Mothers were there with their children, pushing them on the swings, watching them go down the slide. I watched them with a kind of detached clinical curiosity, like an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe. The rituals of their lives were a complete mystery to me. The easy way they wiped a runny nose, the stern but loving tone they used to say, 5 more minutes, the way they hugged a crying child and instantly soothed them. These were skills I had never learned, a language I had never spoken. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my mom. "Hi, honey, just thinking of you. Hope you're having a good week. Your brother sent a new picture of the baby. He's getting so big. Love you." I stared at the message. Each cheerful word was a tiny, sharp needle. My family. They loved me. I knew that. But they didn't understand me. They had no idea who I had become or how vast the chasm was between my life and theirs. I couldn't call her. What would I say? "Mom, the entire foundation of my life has crumbled, and I'm sitting on a park bench watching strangers live the life I threw away?" She would try to help. She would say all the wrong things. She would tell me to find God or to take up a hobby. The well-meaning advice of someone who could never possibly comprehend the scale of my failure. The light faded. The mothers gathered their children and left. The park grew quiet. I was alone on the bench in the dark. A thought, cold and sharp as an icicle, pierced through my numbness. I have no one to call, not just in this moment of crisis, but ever. If my car broke down on the highway, who would I call? Roadside assistance. If I got sick, who would bring me soup? A delivery service. If I died tonight, in this park, who would be the first person they would notify? Probably my assistant at work. She was listed as my emergency contact. The full crushing weight of my isolation finally landed on me. It wasn't an intellectual concept anymore. It wasn't a philosophical price of success. It was a physical reality, a cold, hard, terrifying fact. I finally went home. My apartment was dark and silent, as always. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked over to the giant window and looked out at the city. All those lights, millions of people, living their lives in those little boxes of light. Loving, fighting, laughing, crying, connecting. And I was here, in my box, completely disconnected from all of it. I thought about my career, about the men at the firm. For years I had seen them as the enemy, the embodiment of a toxic system I had to fight against. But now I saw something else. They went home to wives who knew them, to children who loved them unconditionally. Their lives had a dimension I couldn't even fathom. They had a why. a reason for all the stress, all the long hours. My why had always been myself, my ambition, my success, and it had just been revealed as an illusion. I poured myself a drink, not wine, something stronger. I sat down at my sleek minimalist desk and opened my laptop. It was an act of pure self-flagellation. I knew what I was going to do. I had to see it, the final nail in the coffin. I typed his name, Gordon. His profile was still there, still public. A quiet, unassuming chronicle of a life well lived. There was a recent post. It was from that day. It was a picture of him and his wife. They were sitting on a porch swing. They looked older, of course. A few gray hairs, some lines around the eyes. They weren't smiling for a camera, they were just looking at each other. His arm was around her. Her head was resting on his shoulder. They looked comfortable, worn in, like two trees that had grown up side by side, their roots intertwined. The caption was simple. 20 years, still the best decision I ever made. 20 years. It had been 23 years since that graduation party. He had spent the last 2 decades building a life with someone. I had spent the last 2 decades building a career, and at the end of it all, here we were. He had a home, a partner, a family. He had love. I had an apartment, a title, and a bonus. I had, what? A portfolio of achievements, a collection of victories and battles that no longer mattered. I scrolled through the comments on his post. They were from friends, family. Happy anniversary, you two. An inspiration to all of us. Can't believe it's been that long. He was embedded in a community, a web of real human connections. I looked around my empty apartment. I thought about the people in my life, colleagues who were competitors, a family that I had pushed away, friends I had lost touch with. My web had only one person in it, me, and the spider was starting to eat itself. That's when the breakdown began. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic explosion. It was a slow, quiet implosion. The first thing to go was my composure, the professional mask I had worn for so long. It didn't just crack, it disintegrated. A sound came out of my throat, a raw, guttural noise of pure animal pain. It was a sound I had never made before. Then the tears started. Not the dignified, silent tears I had shed a few times in the past. These were wrenching, ugly sobs that tore through my body. I collapsed out of my chair onto the expensive hardwood floor. I curled into a ball, my arms wrapped around myself, as if trying to hold the shattered pieces of my life together. Every regret, every bad decision, every moment of pride and arrogance came flooding back. Rejecting Gordon at the party. I didn't just see it, I felt it. I felt his humiliation. I felt my own smug cruelty. My dismissive attitude towards my friends when they started their families. The jealousy I had masked with scorn. The way I spoke to my mother. The pain I had caused her because I was too proud to admit my own loneliness. Every relationship I had treated like a business transaction. Every person I had used and discarded on my climb to the top. It wasn't society that had done this to me. It wasn't the patriarchy. It wasn't toxic masculinity. It was me, my choices, my ideology, my fear. I had been so afraid of the trap, so terrified of ending up like my mother, that I had run headfirst into a different kind of trap. A beautiful gilded cage of my own making. And I had just realized that I was the only one with the key, and I had thrown it away decades ago. The crying went on for what felt like hours. My body ached. My throat was raw. I lay there on the floor, in the dark, in my ridiculously expensive and empty home. I thought about the future, more years of this, the loneliness stretching out into infinity, holidays spent alone, growing old alone, getting sick alone, dying alone. My legacy wouldn't be the clients I landed or the deals I closed. My legacy would be this echoing silence. My phone, lying on the floor a few feet away, buzzed again. I crawled over to it. It was a work email from my assistant. Sophia, just a reminder about the 8 a.m. leadership breakfast tomorrow. They need the final numbers for the quarterly report. Please advise. I stared at the screen. The leadership breakfast, the quarterly report, the numbers. It was a message from a different planet, a world that I no longer had any connection to. It was all so meaningless. A wave of hysteria washed over me. I started to laugh. It was a wild, unhinged sound, the laughter of someone who has lost everything and just realized it was all a joke. I was laughing at the sheer cosmic irony of it all. I had sacrificed my youth, my fertility, my friendships, my chance at love and a family for a quarterly report. I had traded a lifetime of warmth for a series of deadlines. It was the worst deal in human history, and I had signed it with my eyes wide open. My laughter mixed with the sobs, creating a horrible broken sound. I was 45 years old. I was at the absolute pinnacle of my professional career, and I had never been more alone, more broken, or more utterly and completely defeated. The skyline glittered outside my window, indifferent. The city hummed with the sound of millions of lives being lived, and in my corner office in the sky, I lay on the floor and wept for the life I could have had, and the woman I could have been. The empire was built, and its queen was left with nothing but the dust of her throne,